Welcome to the Revenue Blueprint. This is not another sales podcast on tips and tactics. Instead, we focus on unfiltered stories from founders and early stage sales leaders on what it takes to build a successful revenue team. If you get just a little bit of value from this, we ask that you pay it forward by liking, sharing, and subscribing to the podcast. All right, let's get into the episode.
And welcome to another episode of Revenue Blueprint. We've been focusing on a lot of aspects of seed stage startups, B2B SaaS sales, and now we're starting a series on the first sales hire. I could be more excited to welcome Matt Putnam, who's joining us today. Welcome, Matt.
Cheers for having me, gents.
Let's talk a little bit about what Matt has achieved and dive right into what we can learn from Matt. So, many different roles, including SDR leader, account manager, head of growth, now building out his own sales training course. So I'm excited to dive into his role as a sales pioneer. So some call it a founding AE, go-to-market AE, but regardless of what it's called, it's a high-risk, high-reward job. So let's start right away, Matt. Where were you in your career when you decided to take such a risky career move, becoming first AE hire?
Yeah, I remember the moment when funny enough, Seth, you and Machiel reached out to me. I know I was actually, that was the point when I was a SDR manager. So I joined a startup called Go One, started from Australia, just opened their UK office, and originally joined them to be an account exec. They thought I'd be better suited in a management role for the SDR function because most of my CV was tailored to bringing in new business and booking meetings and so on. So, but I was in that management role for just under 3 years, and yeah, when I was reached out to originally, it was this exciting opportunity based in Romania, travel opportunities, and it was kind of going back to the stuff that my original skill set was better at, which was bringing new business, get people excited about something new. So yeah, we went from management back into IC, which was
the cushy seat of SDR manager. I say that jokingly. We all know that is not an easy job.
Yeah.
So, but what compelled you to do it? Like, what? Why do that?
I think there's a couple of motivations, right? So one of the Go One, it was going through some hyper success. They closed few rounds of funding, and was shifting more towards that medium large organization. There was hundreds of employees at that point, so I'd gone from the being able to pivot new ideas, new strategies, get sign off within 2 hours sometimes on a new idea and plan, to that process really started to drag. Like we want to do something new marketing with the SDRs and so on. I had to get some of them from 3 different people. It was a bit longer. Great fun, did not regret my time there at all. But I don't think that the pace is one of the things that I missed. And then how the role was presented, right? Let's build this all again. Let's start from the beginning, build out some functions, test some sales, then get other people to do the same thing. It's the idea of the excitement of going through that growth again. Because where maybe I felt like the growth was slowing down in my previous job, and this is when I joined Plansat was the company at the time. I did this. It was just come off the back of a company getting a few rounds of funding. Companies were getting funding left, right, and center at the time, right? So stock options and things like that were super appealing, and there's that big dream of, cool, when this company goes big in 5-10 years time, like I'm gonna. When everyone exits, that's going to be early retirement for me. So
you You're retired now?
No, unfortunately not. I'm living the dream, but not retired. So yeah, there's probably those two in combination, I'd say.
The speed of company growth, and obviously the reward for all that risk. I mean, we'll talk about the risk in a bit. How would, and we'll dive into the mindset of an AE and what they can find in joining a early stage startup. But you talked about pace a little bit. Let's talk about that. Like, how did that pace change? How would you explain it to Matt? Well, I guess you experienced it a bit, but how would you explain to someone who doesn't know exactly what they're getting into by being at such an early stage where you don't have to ask for permission, you can just do stuff because it's you doing it?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting experience, right? Because things are faster in the sense of decisions get made quicker, but that comes with a huge element of responsibility, right? Because you're coming up with ideas and they're getting signed off, and like, great, okay, let's try this marketing strategy, let's try this messaging, let's email this type of person, and it's great because you can do things really quickly. But one of the issues that can happen with that, which I've definitely experienced, right, 100%, is the pressure that comes along with the failure that's undoubtedly going to happen and did happen, right? And you'll always get the advice of like, fail as many times as possible until you find the right answer. And great, like, you're going to do that. But there is that element of pressure that comes with it because you've got to find out what works. So yeah, great, you can get things actioned really quickly and test things and so on. But, with that comes the responsibility of, one of these trees have got to bear fruit, right? So, yeah, I think that the thing is, at the time, my personality type is very creative, right? So I can come up with 1,000,001 ideas. It doesn't take too much effort. Then there's the ability to be able to execute as well. So I think that was one real shock to the system, actually, where once you've got a bit of a team around you, and even if you're an AE working with 3 or 4 other AEs, that's 4 of you testing ideas and questioning types and things like that. You get so much more data and response from it. When it's just you, or maybe in this scenario, one other as well, there's less data, so you get less success naturally because there's less of you doing it. So yeah, it's a really interesting mix of kind of speed, but you definitely want more. You need more tests to happen. You need to be able to do more, but you're restricted by your size. And again, like, you've got to kind of realize that that's what you're signing up for when you join.
I think there's 2 points that I want to kind of focus on or unpack a little bit. Is that because you can now do whatever you want, you have the power to choose what to do, but you have opportunity cost. You can't, like, if you do that, you don't have time to do this. So choose wisely. That empowerment came to me when I was early in a startup. And previously, when we made suggestions, it had to go through marketing and branding. And you already presented things defeated, defensive, ready to fight, to make your case, blah, blah, blah. And I remember going to a founder and being like, I think we should change the price on this one thing. And he was already in the back end, and he's like, well, what should it be? I was like, whoa, I thought this was going to go through a lot of filtering before we had to debate this. There's a lot of power there in being able to just make changes and do stuff. And then the other stuff is the volatility. If you're by yourself, right, it's volatile. Like a founder or 2 founders working, there isn't a whole infrastructure to be like smoothing the, it's like having a team. You get 3 rejections in a day, but someone gets a win, it's kind of moderated, right? Whereas if you get a rejection in a day, it's a high, and a rejection the next day, it's a low. Like, it's very volatile. And I mean, at least from my experience, it sounds like from you, it's like, it's emotional too, of like having that whiplash.
That taking sick days at a bigger organization is a lot better than taking sick days.
Are there sick days at a startup? It's like when you're like dragging, you can't reach the keyboard.
Matt, let me, like, so you talked about, hey, I got to figure out some of these tests myself, and like, I'm getting the data myself. What were some of those early experiments that you were running at Plant and App?
So a lot of it was around, well, let's work out the ICP. It's that kind of the classic, like, okay, what are the strengths of the product? Who would actually benefit from this? And you then start looking at the deals already closed won, who was signing off on that. And it's like, okay, well, this is the economic buyer. This is who's actually going to be signing off on the deals. So we're definitely going to be targeting them. What gets them off? Why would they be interested in this? And actually, one thing we realized relatively quickly as well is like, who's the champion? Because actually, the champion's going to be the people using, in this scenario, it was a low-code software building platform. So for these people, they're either full-time coding anyway, and now are adjusting to a new platform, right? That can make things easier for them, but it may be relatively alien to a bunch of people who have got, in some cases, an element of ego behind their skill to be able to develop and build products. So you're then actually making sure you're targeting these people as well to get them on board to champion your product. So a lot of the early tests were trying to understand where people would be clicking depending on what ICP, what topics could we send them? What articles could we send them that would get them interested and actually get them into the ecosystem of PlantSnap? And yeah, it's, there are some experiments where we saw some success. It was like, okay, well, let's continue doing this. But, tenfold that on the experiments that didn't work, right? And like Seth alluded to before, there was a lot of motion to it because you're building this. And you're like, I think this could work. I think this could work. And you've got to take that out because, yeah, you send out you set up a series of emails with some calls, and there'll be scenarios where it'll be a 3-4 email chain, calls in between, 400 people in it, personalized, not personalized, and nothing would happen. You'd be like, whoa, that's a lot of work that's gone into that, and nothing to come out of the back of it. I put that together. It's almost my little baby. But yeah, you then take the learning from it, move on, try something else. But yeah, change small things at a time. That was the key thing as well with these experiments. Okay, well, that didn't work. Keep the same ICP. Maybe we'll change the tone, try a different angle. Maybe it's budget, it's not time, is the incentive, and so on.
What in a framework for this, and it could be done by a founder-led selling before you hire the account executive, but you taking over that because there was enough traction to justify further, enough signal to have warrant some conviction that hiring a talented account executive would drive some repeatability and hopefully predictability and scalability. But the experiments is successful if you get results, whether they're good or bad, and you can be proud of your baby, then your baby is the experiment, but it doesn't need to be successful. And that's what's weird is that, like, as salespeople, we need it to be successful because it drives the revenue, but framing it as if you do the experiment well and you get results, whether they're good or bad, that is a successful experiment and a good use of your time and data points that you can then use to improve the next experiment and iterate towards a successful outcome. I don't know, I've said that probably 1,000 times to founders and AEs because it's like, listen, just because it's not working doesn't mean you didn't do a good job. It just means that those results are not what you wanted, but you have now data. It's like it's nuanced, but if you look at every experiment needing to be a success, you're very quickly going to have that failure and you're going to lose your mind, right? Like, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, and even because when we had our time together, that was a lot of the conversation we would have, right? And you being the sounding board for me at the time, a lot of it was like, well, that we've actually tested quite a few things here. Like, yeah, 4 of the 5 didn't work. Good. We know to avoid that now. Like, that's great. And I think that's a really important thing to think about, especially when people want to join this early startup stage. And you have to accept the fact that that's going to happen, guarantee. Because it's like with my current team now at Thomas, there's 7 of them all doing, they've got 5-6 different tests going on at any one time across 7 of them. And at that point, we know that 3 of them are pretty safe bets. So while you've then got the freedom to test these other things because, at least you've covered your target for the month and so on. When you're taking this first founding or sales pioneer role, you may not have those 3 safe bets as outreach. And, you mentioned about...
There's 0. Yeah.
Yeah.
None. So let's talk about that for a minute. Like, well, I was just going to ask, as you assess the job, it sounds like you have a pretty decent understanding of what you were getting into, but for folks who haven't gotten into this, or even for yourself, what are some of the misconceptions about what the job to be done is, right? It sounds like salespeople expect a playbook, expect some momentum. You come in too early without a founder having shown you at least one way to be successful that you can iterate on. You're inventing the whole go-to-market motion from scratch, right? And you're figuring out a lot of stuff. So there's like a really small window of, well, it's already figured out. We're scaling. It's not figured out at all. You might be sacrificed on the altar of figuring out go-to-market, and you're not going to make it for very long. What would you say to other AEs considering joining the first sales hire?
I think that level of understanding what does work, right? Like, and I think this may be one thing I could have clarified a bit more going into this job, right? Because I think I had to transition very quickly. First 3 months, I had to change the way I was thinking about how I'd reach out to people. Back to your question, Jason, about like my experiments. Like the first 3 months were very different to the months that were afterwards, because very quickly I realized that what was working for outreach and bringing in business would not work for me. You know, the CEO of the company had a really good reputation in the market with a huge old client base from a previous business. And that was bringing in new people, bringing people, I suppose, back to then try out this new, really exciting platform. You know, I had no reputation in the market, right? So I couldn't replicate that route to market. And very quickly I realized that, and okay, well, we've got to find another way of scaling it. So I think like if you're looking into these roles, there's an element of assessing how business has come about previously and what's worked, because it's less
understatement
if you know that, right?
No, it's such an understatement. I mean, I just like pause on that. Say it again.
Where was the business? I think I need a little more context because I don't have the same background you said that. So like, where was the business when you joined? And what, like, help us understand, like, what that ICP was when you joined, and what the kind of what you started to uncover, understand, and what that evolution was like.
Sure. So the ICP did shift actually during my time there, but the business at the time just received seeding round, so had money in the bank with some runway, and the previous business were buying sort of one-off modules which you could bolt onto your website for, you know, like form capturing and things to improve people's buying experiences when going to your website. So the ICP at that point would be IT managers, people who were sort of managing the day-to-day of anything to do with your website and purchasing a website and things like that. Where it shifted to was more, well, we're building applications and software now. You know, we've built, the business historically built so much software with these modules, they were able to bring this all into one platform, and then people could use this platform to build software, all this stuff already built in. So you could build software really quickly, like really powerful software. It was a really powerful bit of kit. But at that point, the ICP is changing. We're looking at bigger companies with more spend. You're no longer looking at the IT manager. You're looking more towards the VP of technology, the CIO, the CTO, for those economic buyer roles. And they are very different ICPs, hugely different. And the first one was what's generating the success and generating the revenue. And, the business was in a really solid place off the back of that. People wanted to go through this growth of, okay, well, how do we double it? The market for that previous one is a lot smaller than the new market we were looking for. So we had to find a way of making that work. So that's that was the position when I joined. It's like, okay, how do we reach these more senior people with bigger teams, bigger budgets?
So maybe two things to think about for somebody who is joining. In your case, if we could distill this down a bit further, you had a large client base of happy, successful clients, which is usually indicative of product market fit and scale. the scalability, that came from network. So the new account executive needed to identify a new way to drive, or a way to drive new business outside of founder network. So this founder had a massive network, which is almost like deceivingly large because of how scalable that was, but it is not truly scalable. It comes to a limit. And first account executive in this role had to figure out how to get new business into the funnel. So that was one of your jobs. And then the second one is going from almost like a services business a little bit to a product. So those are two major kind of risks to the founding account executive or go-to-market account executive or sales pioneer. And Matt, I'm just do you feel that summarizes up pretty well, Matt, and like the two major risks that you had to, it's like three-dimensional things that you had to experiment on that made your success slower?
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. And I think, the overarching theme across both of those where is product led, right? In the first scenario, you hear the story and the excitement of what's happened previously, and you assume there's product market fit based on that. The shift in the second is the shift in the actual product from a service to an actual almost SaaS model solution that was being offered. So huge change in the product. And yeah, I think that was fair because two challenges sort of popped up there. We were rediscovering what works, and there wasn't really anyone who could hand on heart go, I know this is going to work. Like this is we've done market research because we were doing that market research as we were going. So there's a big question mark on that, and the product shifting and changing. So it's rebuilding all the new collateral, actually understanding what the product is and what would make people excited about the product, because we were buzzed about it, with all these new features. But there's that other element, isn't there? It's like new ICP. Well, what do they even care about? And again, so is there product market fit? Again, question mark. Don't actually know. And yeah, that presented a challenge, right?
So again, I want to continue to unpack these. I think it's important for anybody listening, both a founder or an AE. Is the current product that the account executive will be selling in market, and how many customers do they currently have on that platform, product, whatever it is that the account executive will be selling? And then two, how did they get those customers? And 2 times the risk is pretty risky. If it's, yes, lots of customers from network, okay, you're being hired to figure out the go-to-market and try to create new pipeline without any indication you can, but okay. Or, yes, we've been getting, well, I guess you wouldn't have a situation where you'd be getting customers on a platform you don't have. So it's like an interesting of those two risks that are so subtle, but are kind of enormous to the success of an account executive joining. And to the timeline and grit and determination to fight through those stages. That's why I inferred to you, like you've had incredible grit, but we both know it was slower going than you had hoped out of the gates. There was more to figure out and less momentum to work off of.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've just like almost light bulb moment. And I just realized, thinking back to that moment, I've worked at many smaller organizations going through that initial growth stage, but that was the smallest and earliest. And it's the realization of actually that was the first time I'd ever experienced it in that situation. Right. So it was a brand new experience. And I've had in the lead up to that, I was 8 years selling, a couple of years managing as well. So I had experience, but for that role, when I think back to it, actually I had zero experience with that kind of outreach and that kind of creativity to come up with ideas to try and work out what works, right? Which I think is an interesting point to think, because you could go from, I've got a really good background selling, great. I've got, my CV's great, my history's great. I know the deals I've closed previously, but actually once you go into this new setting, it doesn't really mean all that much. Yeah, some frameworks, some methodologies, the basics of a playbook, but then applying that there's 2 different things. It's completely 2 different things.
Well, and if you have momentum already that the founder has proven, you can then capitalize on it. But if you're starting from scratch, like you said, it is a massive shift. to figure out all of those things.
Do you remember any breakthrough moments that you had where you're just like, oh shit, yes, like this makes total sense now, or even just like a big win that you had and what the realization was afterwards?
A lot of it came from the campaigns that we were running that would get the response, right? And they were massive. Like, as soon as it happened, we were like, it was actually a massive step for the business, because we were like, okay, we've sent, it was, well, let me rephrase that. It wasn't when the first person responded. It was when the second, third, fourth person responded to the same messaging. And it's like, okay, snap. This is resonating with the ICP. And then it's okay, well, with the person I was working with to do this, let's both do this now. So the volume's going to double. And then the more responses come. Having said that, that it would reach its limit and that would produce X amount based on the effort we were putting in. So then you try to find ways of improving it. Sometimes you'd improve it. Sometimes you then ruin it. And then it's like, okay, what did we learn the first time? Let's go back to the basics of that. So I think the things I used to get the most excited about was when we were having because don't get me wrong, the deals that were coming through and things like, they were exciting, and don't get me wrong, like there's that revenue contribution and when we got wins like that, it was exciting. But when you had like a scalable message that worked, you're like, well, this could potentially be so much bigger than just one deal, right? So I just remember those moments of just like, they've responded to the email, I'm calling them, and then they're keen on the phone. You're like, look, let's book this in. It's then kind of going back to the SDR of just getting excited about the meetings being booked. And outside of that, I think some of the events we used to go to, and is when you were having chats with people and you're surrounded by a couple of competitors as well. And the energy we were bringing as a team at these events was great, and the message was resonating with people. We had a good time with events, and you were able to then test that. Again, it comes back to the messaging working, right? So I'm then testing that messaging 400 times in one day, and then I'm coming away with 80 plus leads of people are like, let's arrange time after this, and you're like, I think we're working on something here. I think this is starting to look pretty good. How do we turn this onto website material and make this more of a thing everywhere? Yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
His role evolved to head of growth, so you can imagine.
We will talk about that for a second, maybe like understanding kind of that evolution in the team and your role, how that evolved over that year and a half that you were there.
So I think that role evolved out of the idea of were we probably too small to have a full-time head of marketing? Potentially, right? And I think at the time, when you're doing that, I don't want to call it grunt work actually, because an element of it is, but it's so important, right? So I don't want to disregard the importance of being that person on the front line, doing the outreach, seeing the reactions and things like that, because you're the person who's finding out the latest feedback on your products first, right? But you're able to work out the marketing so much quicker by doing that. And that's, I'm such a big advocate of any company out there who's got an SDR function. Yeah, don't get me wrong, it's part of sales, but actually it's part of marketing. And like, marketing needs to lean on those SDRs, and the SDRs need to lean on marketing. That feedback loop is one of the most powerful feedback loops a company can get. And 9 times out of 10, companies do not lean on that. And but I think there was a good link there, right? I'm having these conversations a lot, so being able to then transition that onto marketing material, and I have a skill set behind the background of building websites and things like that. So there's a good little transition there. Still was doing a lot of the outreach, and the job didn't change all that much, but it was just more of a responsibility with the website, with the marketing, and how we put our name out there.
Now, maybe shifting to folks who are looking to become a first sales hire, where would be the ideal phase in someone's career, from your opinion, that would like set them up for success?
I think there's probably two angles to it, right? I reckon you could again, there's an element of luck, and the younger people tend to be, you tend to be more enthusiastic, maybe a bit more risk averse, so maybe your sensor checking on how healthy a company is, where they are, you may not cover every detail, right? But I think there's a huge benefit to starting at a startup. When you're younger, you've got the energy to take the rejections, do the tests, and put yourself out there. So I think, as a first or second role, it could be great.
Well, but I love it from a risk management. You mean they're comfortable taking on more risk?
Yeah, and the reason for bringing that up is because I think, like I say, to my point about when I joined, and it was like a brand new experience for me. It was almost like I'd become an SDR all over again, at a brand, and had element of working it out. On the flip side, I would also suggest once you have sort of 5, 6, 7 years experience, because
okay, that's what I was going to challenge you. You said first or second job, and now you're saying 5 or 6, right? So it's striking that balance. Continue, yeah.
There's two scenarios, I think. So I think if you're, if you've got the energy to just like really just apply yourself, do the cold calls, do the emails, but then there was a huge benefit for me having the playbooks I had from my management role, but also the sales roles I had in the lead up to that. So when it came to running discovery calls, I knew what I was doing, right? It was just a case of tailoring it to the new platform I was selling. And I had 3 or 4 tests when I was joining that I was like, I could try these to generate some interest. So yeah, I maybe if it was a founding SDR role for outreach, you could start younger in your career. The thing is, like in this scenario, if it's a founding AE role and you're doing, this is founder handing over to you to run the sales as well, then the experience would definitely probably be more of a requirement.
And I would say there's something else that you're underestimating that you have is you had success behind you. And that is a foundation on which you have your confidence that when you're getting punched in the nose and you're failing and you're struggling and your experiments are not producing the results that you want, to say, wait a second, like, I know what I'm doing. I can persist here. I know how to be successful. I've been successful. And to eventually check out if you're like, it's not me, it's the product. Because like, you're a stoic man. You have a lot of grit. I think the world of you. That isn't, like, let's not take that for granted. Like, the reality is you get beat up, right? And if you don't have enough success and momentum in your career to take those beatings, you start to think you're the weakest link. And like, founders don't want to say that their baby doesn't have product market fit. So if you're taking that abuse, I've been in the situation where it's like, oh, it's not product market fit. It's the go to market motion. You're the problem. And it's like, wait, like, I'm pretty sure like all the signals are telling me otherwise. I'm not going to implode and be the problem of the failure of this whole company. I will persist and persevere, right? And those are dark times to go through. And it's especially would be rattling, I think, if you do it without a little bit of success and without a little wisdom and a little bit of, maybe momentum in your career, because it's certainly going to have its share of setbacks, even if the role is successful. And in many cases, the companies don't work out, and then it's a failure.
So there's probably a caveat on all of that, and I think a lot of that comes from an element of experience, but also I think, and this is a really hard thing to do, right? But you've got to kind of assess your own personality and behaviors at the same time, right? Because you get people who can take rejection, take it on board, not take the emotion out of it, take the emotion out of it completely. And some people that's an impossible ask, right? So I think, one thing to think about is, say you're an account exec or a sales manager, or, whatever your sales role is previously, and you're going into a role of this, assess the situations you've been in previously and think about the things that made you feel really awkward and really crap. And if those things happen to be, I don't know, creating new cadences and sequences and messaging that failed, and because maybe it was made for you, because a lot of companies are set up that way, right? Where the marketing and the managers create the messaging that you then go to market with. So if you're in a situation like that and that makes you feel comfortable, well, a role like this would make you feel very uncomfortable. If you're in a role where you are creating a lot of the messaging, you're doing a lot of that testing, and you're trying to come up with new ideas and so on, and you enjoy that, then, fantastic. Like, because you're going to go in with that mindset and the behavior of, well, we're going to test this, we're going to test this, we're going to test this. Let's see which one works. And, experience does play into that a bit, if you've had that experience previously. But I think a lot of it is, you've got to think as well about how you would handle that situation, because it's a very real situation. I guarantee any startup you would join would experience that at some point. Right? So you have a think about that. How did it make you feel? How would you react to it? And that's an interesting thing, because you don't normally think about that when you're being the interviewee, because this is an exciting opportunity. I want it. And
I think that those are all things that we go through in that type of role, right? I've been the first sales hire and the third sales hire myself in the past, and I think those things are like, it's certainly worth thinking about, but it's hard to replicate until you're actually there. But I think one belief I have on this is that good product market fit can solve a lot of these ailments, especially if you're jacked up about the direction, or you really believe in the company's product and what it can do. So looking back at your experience in this, and if you were to do it again, where was your belief in the product market fit, and how did that change over time?
Yeah, that great question. If I go back to the hiring process, my belief in the product market fit was the previous success that I was, the numbers that were, we've just had successful seed rounds. You hear that, you're like, okay, well, things are fine, but that's actually got nothing to do with product market fit.
Right. So, that's just proxies for product market fit.
And,
but somebody else thought you had it or would eventually get it, and it was worth a bet.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's I don't regret my time there at all. The learning curve there was unbelievable. But if I was to do that again, right, I believe a really good product is a product that you can go on, you can understand it. And, I like to do the thing where I don't assume everyone's an idiot, but assume everyone's an idiot. And would an idiot understand? So I can do this thing in my brain where I turn myself into an idiot and I read the words and I'm like, I don't know what that means. I actually don't know what that means. What does that mean? And then ask someone who works at the company, what does that mean? And if they can't tell you in a simple way, or they start using more words like you're on the website and things like that, you're like, okay, that's red flag number one for me. And whenever I'm writing emails, I do the same thing. I look at the email back and I go, okay, I see 3 words there with 9 letters. I need to turn those into 3 4-letter words, or 2, because I need to dumb it down, because then, and I think that's when it's one sign you've got product market fit. If you can explain something super simply so people can understand, and like, that makes sense. Bam, okay. There's indicator 1, you've got product market fit. 2, again, I think Seth's point earlier, so important. How are the current sales coming in? Like, what's working on the website? What page is converting the most? Let me have a look at it and understand what you're doing, because if that's selling to the ICP, great. I want to understand why. And I think there's some of the things I would be definitely asking now. And, I used to say at this company, right, I used to really struggle understanding what we did, because we did so much. And I wish we had a niche and we could, for this job role, this is what we do. You're going to love it because it solves this specific problem that I know you have. Let's talk, and this is a hard thing to gauge, but I think, again, do you understand the basic lingo that they're pushing forward, and are people actually coming to you and, maybe not network-led sales? So,
well, you've inspired me to write about which questions you should ask as an interviewee, and I think the best part about this is the best interviews are with account executives who scrutinize the hell out of the business. and they ask the toughest questions. And when we get into those questions, I'm thinking, this is probably somebody who's really good, who's assessing opportunity costs of going someplace, and they have many options. And so I think a key takeaway is you don't need to sell the founder that they have product market fit and you're excited to join because you want to join a startup. It's more like you'll actually get you'll be a better candidate if you ask lots of scrutinous questions. And to your point, Matt, if you don't understand the answers and it's really complicated, it's probably not working. And there's a lot of like smoke and mirrors to deceive. And so not deliberately, just because everybody there has to believe that it's working. But you're going to be the very clear litmus test between the market and the entire organization when you put yourself right in between that conversation between customers like, I don't know what you're selling, I don't give you money for it. And everyone's like, no, this is great. You must be the problem. And you're like, no. Customers don't want it. They don't want it. This isn't working. It's a great way to interview, and to your point, to scrutinize, now that you've done it before, whether you'd be joining a company that you could thrive in.
Absolutely. And if you're asking a founder about the finances and the success, like asking a prospect about budget is nothing in comparison to that, right? Because the first is, in some cases, so personal, but it's also going to be personal to you afterwards, because that's your future once you get that job right. So it's a really, really, really good point.
And I think too, like on that point is, you want to understand intimately how they got those customers, what those main selling points were, and then if given the opportunity, back channel or ask those customers directly how they're feeling about the product and the chances to renew. Because with all the upside that comes with being a first sales hire, there's plenty of downside, as we've talked about. And the only way for you to truly build conviction on that, I think, is to get some customer references and understand how the product is or the service is actually being used. Otherwise, you're basically buying into the sales pitch or marketing of the founder and
the collective delusion.
Right, exactly.
I think to challenge that though, I think when you think about like the recruitment process, right, the ability to go and get customer references is a really tough thing. Like if you think about how Seth, you told me a story the other day about the lead up to you joining a startup, and you had your trial run, and success came off the back of it. Great, but I think people are either they won't have the opportunity to do that because it depends what their hiring situation is. Maybe they're looking for a job, and maybe one of the people who's responding is a startup, and it's exciting. Your skill set could be valuable. You may not have the opportunity to clarify customer references. And then the other one is, we know what outreach is like, right? Message 100 people, get 2 responses. And companies don't always advertise all their customers, right? So there could be a bit of mismatch whether you would get a response to that. But if you can, 100%.
I'd say most candidates are not scrutinous, maybe at all. Very little. So I think Jason's example maybe is more challenging or extreme, but there's certainly far more that can be done that isn't being done by most candidates. And many of them are joining companies daily that haven't done any scrutiny. And in the short term, it looks exciting, but man, is it brutal. And the upside's huge. But to your point, it's just like, then you're just flipping probably worse than flipping a coin. You're just placing a bet. You're just kind of guessing, is it going to work?
Yeah, and you may be scared to reach out to the customers, but that's for the short term of winning over the interview, right? That's 1-2 hours of interviews over the course of 3 weeks versus the next year, 2 years of your career. So it's worth making that risk and trying that, because I think when you are going through that interview process, it's the short term gain. I need to get to the next interview, and I think it can be incredibly powerful to be more scrutinous and ask those questions, and maybe you upset the odd founder or the odd interviewer, but I think how good you'll feel about doing that. And when you do find that right place, I've had various jobs over the last 10 years. 3 of them are fantastic. 4 of them were terrible. And it's like, I'm not, again, I've learned from the ones I didn't enjoy, and I've taken those learnings everywhere. But at the same time, one of the big learnings from those roles were, I'm going to ask this question at the next interview, because if I get the flag that this is going to be the same here, like, I'm not coming to that second interview, right? So it's, I think if you have the
and if you're doing one that's failing, you're not doing the successful one.
Yeah.
Right? Because the successful one is such a career trajectory and financial changer, life-changing thing, that if you're doing the one that doesn't have product market fit and you're struggling, you're not doing the other one. And there's nothing as a salesperson you're going to do to get the company out of not having product market fit. Like, that's just not a thing that you're going to sell your way out of. And I had to learn that the hard way. Maybe flipping to the other side, and we can get you out of here on soon. Keep you around forever, because this is a lot of wisdom. What do you wish founders knew when they were interviewing candidates that would be helpful for them for setting it all up for success?
I think there's probably an element of, in the same way we're expecting, well, we're suggesting that the interviewee, the person looking for that founding AE role, should ask more questions and clarify and qualify better the situation of the business. You probably need to assess what you're looking for from that person you're going to hire first, right? I have conversations with a lot of people around, and Seth, we've spoken about this previously, around that strategic mindset versus the executing mindset, going out there and doing it. And it's two very different mindsets. And this is where, when companies start to scale, you get a lot more success, because you can split out those two mindsets, and the doers just go and do, and you get really good at doing really quickly. And the creative mindset gets really good at well, this worked last time, let's try this messaging, let's tweak this slightly. And it's two very different skill sets. So, I think the founders need to assess both skill sets, and not just, have you sold? How much have you sold? What were the scenarios where you did sell? It's like, well, there's, talk to me about the creative things you've done to generate more business. Tell me about when your pipeline was low and you had to fill it. What did you do? What levers did you pull? What did you think up? And that will give you an indication on, this person can come up with some ideas. This person can't come up with ideas, well, then you've got to come up with the ideas as the founder, or if you've got someone in marketing, because you can't then expect them to do so. If that's not the way they work, and you've got to come to that conclusion, because you could hire an absolutely killer doer, put stuff in front of them, they'll do it. Bam, bam, calls, emails. It's more rare to find people that are both, but you're more likely to find one or the other. So assess that, and if you're going to hire someone who's that more creative mindset, well, you're probably going to have to look at maybe a cheaper resource to support them that is more of the doer. And maybe that's where you look at having a founding AE with a supporting SDR, or offshore that, and so on. And great, then you've got a great setup for someone who's going to be coming up with messaging, coming up with the creatives, coming up with the presentations and the discovery decks to take someone through an incredibly creative and beautiful and tailored sales process. So I think that's one thing to definitely think about. And then, how do you assess independence as well, right? Like, that's killer. You have to, are they independent to just get on with it?
I love the spectrum of, like, strategic thinker, very curious, strategy, doesn't do. We know those people are out there. And on the other end is will do whatever you're told better than anybody else, doesn't think for themselves at all. And you need to figure out on that spectrum, where does the candidate lie, and what do you need? Can you do all the strategic thinking for them? Great, they can do. But if you need them to think a bit, I do hear that from founders. They're like, I wish these people were more strategic. It's like, well, you hired a doer. Like, I like that.
Maybe the other thing to assess is, if you've got the skill set internally as the founder to run experiments, because again, that's, if you need to have an understanding that it's a massive experiment. Things will go wrong, but those wrongs will eventually turn into rights. And So you've probably got to look for that in the people that you're going to be interviewing, but you've also probably got to mentally put yourself in a position of, I've got to put my trust in someone else to do that now, because I'm going to be doing that less. Am I willing to hand over the reins to this person? Is the person I'm hiring, do I trust them to do that? And again, oh, you closed 600 grand at your last job, or you closed $1 million at your last job, doesn't answer that question. But it's a great statement to bring out in an interview, put on a CV. Doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be successful in doing that, right? So, yeah.
This is so good. We'll have to have you back on. We could talk about this all day. Jason, you always ask a question here at the end.
What is one piece of advice or lesson that you think about almost daily?
Oh, one thing I'm absolutely obsessed with, right? And I've done many profile tests and things like that, and I never used to be this, like data-driven, analytical. I've become obsessed with it, like maybe the last 3-4 years, but just treat everything like an experiment. Just experiment everything and just get into that mindset. And the reason why that for me is so important is personality-wise, I'm a very emotional person, very energetic, very optimistic. I like people to like me. I don't like it when people don't like me, classic. And so the reality is like the rejection is harsher for me, right? I'm not compared to everyone else, but for me personally, I've seen people in the past who handle rejection a lot easier. And the thing that's helped me shift to that of just, I just treat everything like an experiment. It's ones and zeros. It's response rate. It's not response rate. It's clicks. It's not clicks. It's 0%. It's 17%. You know what I mean? And at that point, I'm just looking for numbers. And then all I'm trying to do is just up the numbers ever so slightly and just incremental slight changes. And it's just obsess over that experiment. And I'm not expecting something to massively increase, but once I've set a bar, I'm like, okay, where's the next 1% going to come from? Let's change this. Let's try this. It's this word. And, for me, that's, especially the last 3 years, has really changed the game for everything I do. I mean, even my sales training stuff that I post and my LinkedIn activity now, right? Like 4 months ago, I was challenged to post on LinkedIn and it just became an experiment. And I became obsessed with that experiment. And then fast forward 4 months and it's, the stats are incredible now. And it's just like applying that to everything kind of changes the game.
Great attitude. And where can people find you, Matt, with all of this LinkedIn content and valuable materials?
Unfortunately, I don't think I'm the only Matthew Putnam on LinkedIn because, Putnam being a state in the US, I think there are companies named Putnam. But the easiest place to find me is on LinkedIn, Matthew Putnam and Thomas, or Matthew Putnam and Sales Upskill. And I'm definitely the only Matthew Putnam at both those firms. So type that into the search bar, you find me. You will find me.
Oh, man. You're a treasure. Thank you so much for joining us, Matt. I will look forward to learning more from you and following you on LinkedIn and hopefully having you back soon, Matt.
Yeah, appreciate it, James. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Matt.